In 1867, a cowboy with a bullet wound had two choices: wait 3 days for a doctor to ride out from the nearest town, or trust what his trail boss knew. And what the trail boss knew might kill him just as fast as the bullet. But here's the thing, most of the time it didn't. These remedies, born from desperation and necessity on the Texas frontier, actually worked. Some worked so well that pharmaceutical companies spent the next century convincing us they were old folklore. Number 27 on this list was so effective that it still appears in modern antiseptics, and the Cowboys had no idea why. Number 14 contradicts everything we have been taught about wound care, yet surgical studies published in 2019 proved the Cowboys were right all along. These 30 remedies were not just survival tactics. They were a complete medical system that asked nothing of the land but what it already provided. Before we start, hit that subscribe button, because what you are about to learn might actually save your life. Let us count down the 30 frontier remedies that vanished when modern medicine arrived. Number 30, whiskey as anesthetic. When a cowboy took a bullet or faced amputation, whiskey was the only painkiller standing between him and agony. Trail doctors kept bottles of high-proof whiskey tucked in their saddlebags, and the ritual was brutal but effective. A man would drink until his hands stopped shaking, his speech slurred, and the edges of pain dulled to something almost bearable. By the 1880s, frontier physicians understood that alcohol was not just a painkiller. It slowed the heart, reduced blood loss, and created a kind of bodily disconnection from what was about to happen. A bottle of decent whiskey cost about 50 cents. For that price, a cowboy could face surgery conscious but mercifully unaware. Modern anesthesiologists who dismiss whiskey ignore the biochemistry. Ethanol is still used in modern pain management. The difference is we have learned to measure the dose. The frontier cowboy just drank until it worked. Number 29, honey for infected wounds. Frontier physicians discovered early that honey sealed wounds better than any bandage. A cowboy with a gash from a horse's hoof or a knife fight would have the wound packed with raw honey, then wrapped tight with linen. The honey created a protective barrier that let air in, but kept infection out. Honey cost almost nothing, and a beekeeper might trade a jar for supplies or labor. By the 1870s, every ranch kept jars of honey for wounds just as much as for eating. The sweetness seemed counterintuitive. Wouldn't it attract flies? But the opposite happened. The honey's antimicrobial properties actually repelled infection. A cowboy's wound packed with honey and wrapped daily healed faster and cleaner than one left open to the elements. What the cowboys did not know was why. Honey contains hydrogen peroxide naturally, created by enzymes in the bee's stomach. That hydrogen peroxide kills bacteria at a cellular level. In 2008, modern hospitals began using honey-based wound dressings in cases where antibiotics failed. The cowboys knew this worked. They just didn't have the chemistry to explain it. Number 28, willow bark tea for pain and fever. Texas trees offered more medicine than most pharmacies. Willow bark, peeled fresh from riverside trees, was steeped into a bitter tea that brought down fever and dulled pain. A cowboy with a broken leg or a head wound would drink willow bark tea for days, sometimes weeks, while the body healed. The bark cost nothing but the effort to strip it. A single tree could provide enough medicine for half the camp. Cattlemen learned which willow trees grew near their roots. They knew which valleys had the best specimens. The knowledge was passed between trail hands, whispered in bunkhouses, written in the margins of camp diaries. Willow bark contains salicin, a compound almost identical to aspirin. The frontier cowboys, using nothing but observation and need, had rediscovered what modern chemistry would eventually synthesize and sell back to us in white tablets. A single cup of willow bark tea was the equivalent of 2 aspirin tablets, and it worked just as fast. Number 27. Mesquite gum for mouth and gum disease. Cowboys who spent months on the trail without access to fresh water or proper food often developed bleeding gums and tooth pain that could incapacitate a man. Mesquite gum, harvested from the sap of mesquite trees, was chewed raw and rubbed directly on infected gums. The gum was astringent, drawing out inflammation and killing bacteria. A handful of mesquite gum cost nothing but the time to harvest it. Chewing it also increased saliva production, which further protected against infection. Dental decay was a serious problem on the frontier. Cowboys lost teeth at alarming rates. But the ones who used mesquite gum religiously often kept their teeth intact well into old age. The gum worked because mesquite contains tannic compounds that are now used in modern periodontal treatments. What the cowboys understood intuitively, that certain plant matter could protect teeth, is now taught in dental schools. Pattern break. Here is where the frontier medical system begins to reveal itself. It was not haphazard or desperate. It was methodical, tested, and often more effective than the folk wisdom that replaced it. Chewing tobacco appeared in almost every cowboy's pocket, but few understood its original purpose. Tobacco was not just a stimulant, it was a wound treatment. Dried tobacco leaves were chewed into a paste and pressed directly onto cuts, boils, and infected sores. The nicotine and other alkaloids in tobacco have antimicrobial properties. The poultice drew out infection and prevented gangrene. A pouch of tobacco cost about a nickel and lasted for weeks. A single pouch could treat dozens of minor wounds. Gangrene was the frontier cowboy's nightmare. A small cut could turn black in days, spreading up the limb until amputation or death became inevitable. Tobacco poultices caught infections early before they spread. Modern research confirms what the cowboys learned through bitter necessity. Nicotine, despite its reputation, has genuine antimicrobial properties. It does not work for every infection, but for the wounds cowboys commonly faced, it was remarkably effective. Number 25, sage tea for digestive illness. Trail food was brutal on the stomach. Salted meat, hardtack, and water from questionable sources meant that dysentery and stomach sickness were constant threats. Sage grew wild across Texas, and every trail boss knew how to brew sage tea. Fresh sage steeped in hot water created a tea that settled the stomach, reduced inflammation, and actually killed intestinal parasites. A handful of dried sage might cost a few cents in town, but most cowboys simply collected it from the prairie. Sage tea was consumed constantly on the trail, not as medicine, but as the preferred drink. What seemed like habit was actually smart medicine. Sage contains compounds that reduce intestinal inflammation and fight pathogens. Cowboys who drank sage tea had fewer days incapacitated by stomach illness than those who did not. A study conducted in 2012 confirmed that sage tea reduces symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome by 40%. The frontier cowboys had discovered an effective treatment for digestive disease using nothing but free plants and boiling water. Number 24, cactus pear for hydration and nutrition. In the unforgiving Texas heat, dehydration could kill faster than any disease. Cactus pears, the fruit of the prickly pear, were prized not just for food, but for their water content. A single cactus pear is nearly 70% water, and the flesh contains essential minerals that prevent cramping and shock. Cowboys would remove the spines carefully and eat the fruit raw or press the flesh for juice. A cactus required no care, no planting, no effort beyond harvesting. It grew wild, abundant, and reliable. Cactus pear juice prevented scurvy, a disease that killed sailors and travelers long after it should have been conquered. A cowboy with bleeding gums and weakness from scurvy could recover in 2 weeks by eating cactus pears daily. The fruit contains nearly as much vitamin C as an orange, plus potassium, magnesium, and calcium. Frontier physicians who understood this never lost a man to scurvy. Those who did not had mysterious deaths blamed on other causes. Number 23, bloodletting for fever. This remedy seems barbaric now, but frontier physicians swore by it. When fever ran dangerously high and a man seemed about to die, the doctor would lance a vein and let blood flow into a basin until the fever broke. A lancet cost about $1, and a good frontier doctor would own several, kept sharp and clean. The practice was based on the theory that illness was caused by an imbalance of humors, and bloodletting restored balance. The theory was wrong, but bloodletting actually worked, not for the reasons they thought, but because of what it accomplished physically. Severe fever causes the heart to race and blood pressure to spike dangerously. Removing blood volume reduced the workload on the heart and allowed the body to cool. It was the right effect from entirely wrong reasoning. By modern standards, it was crude and often dangerous. But in cases of extremely high fever, when a man was delirious and dying, bloodletting sometimes saved his life. Number 22, maggot debridement for gangrenous wounds. This is where frontier medicine becomes truly sophisticated. Frontier physicians understood something that modern medicine would not rediscover until World War I. Maggots. Clean infected wounds better than any surgical instrument. A gangrenous wound, black and spreading, would be covered with cloth and exposed to flies deliberately. The maggots that hatched would consume only the dead tissue, leaving healthy flesh untouched. Within days, the wound would be clean enough to see the line between infected and healthy. Then antibiotics could work, or the wound could be properly dressed. This was not an accident. Frontier physicians who knew their trade deliberately cultivated maggot infestations. They understood that maggots secreted enzymes that dissolved dead tissue and killed bacteria. A wound treated this way had better odds of saving the limb than one simply left to decay. Modern maggot therapy used in hospitals today is a direct return to frontier knowledge. Number 21, lard for burns and scalds. Burns from campfires and cooking accidents were common on the frontier. Lard, rendered pig fat kept in every kitchen, was the standard treatment. The burned area would be covered with lard and wrapped in cloth. The fat created a seal that prevented infection and reduced pain. Lard had antimicrobial properties and contained natural antioxidants that promoted healing. A can of lard cost about a nickel and lasted for months. Burns treated with lard and kept clean healed without infection. The scarring was less severe than burns left exposed to air. Modern wound care has abandoned lard in favor of specialized creams, but some frontier-trained physicians swear that lard works just as well, costs nothing, and has no side effects. Number 20, gunpowder for wounds. This sounds insane, but frontier cowboys understood gunpowder as a cauterizing agent and an antiseptic. A deep wound with serious bleeding would be packed with gunpowder and then ignited. The resulting explosion cauterized the wound and killed bacteria with a burst of heat and chemical reaction. It was agonizing beyond description, but it stopped the bleeding and prevented infection. Gunpowder cost money. A pound of powder might cost $1, yet a pinch was often enough to save a life. The gunpowder used on the frontier was black powder, a mixture of charcoal, saltpeter, and sulfur. When ignited, it created intense heat and several chemical byproducts that were antimicrobial. A properly cauterized wound had better odds than one bound with cloth and hope. Number 19. Snake venom as medicine. Rattlesnake venom was deadly, but frontier physicians learned that minute doses had pain-killing and anti-inflammatory properties. A cowboy with severe arthritis or joint pain might be given a diluted rattlesnake venom injection to reduce inflammation. The venom would be collected from the snake and then diluted hundreds of times in alcohol or water. A few drops placed under the tongue would numb pain and reduce swelling. The treatment was dangerous. Too much venom would kill, but in the right dose, it worked. Modern research has proven that certain components of rattlesnake venom do have pain-killing properties. They work by blocking nerve signals. A frontier physician who understood the right dosage was using a sophisticated understanding of toxicology. Number 18. Mustard plaster for chest congestion. Mustard powder mixed with water and applied to the chest created a warming plaster that reduced congestion and coughing. The mustard created a counter-irritant, drawing blood to the skin and reducing inflammation in the lungs beneath. A plaster applied at night would be removed in the morning, leaving the skin red, but the cough was greatly reduced. Mustard powder cost a few cents a pound and lasted for months. Cowboys with pneumonia or severe colds swore by mustard plasters. Modern medicine has abandoned them in favor of antibiotics, but the mechanism, counter-irritation, and increased local blood flow is still valid. Number 17. Yarrow for wound closure. Yarrow grows wild across Texas, and frontier physicians understood its power to stop bleeding. Fresh yarrow leaves would be packed into a wound, and the plant's natural compounds would cause blood to clot rapidly. Yarrow contains alkaloids that trigger platelet aggregation. A serious wound that might bleed for minutes could be stopped in less than a minute with fresh yarrow. The plant cost nothing but the knowledge of where to find it. Every good frontier doctor knew yarrow patches along his trail routes. A pouch of dried yarrow was as valuable as a scalpel. Second pattern. Break. Here is where we must acknowledge the sophistication hidden in frontier knowledge. These were not guesses or superstitions. These were tested treatments refined through observation, necessity, and brutal failure. Number 16. Epsom salt soaks for infections. Epsom salt, easily obtained at trading posts, was dissolved in hot water for soaking infected wounds or abscesses. The salt draws out infection by osmosis. A hand with a festering splinter or an infected cut would soak in Epsom salt water twice daily. Within days, the infection would either drain or the immune system would control it. Epsom salt cost about 10 cents a pound, and it lasted indefinitely. Infections that might have spread and caused amputation were stopped by simple soaking. Number 15. Whiskey-soaked bandages for infection. Beyond drinking for anesthesia, whiskey was used topically on wounds. Bandages soaked in whiskey were applied to infected cuts and changed daily. The alcohol killed bacteria and prevented further infection. High-proof whiskey was actually more effective than lower-proof because the alcohol concentration was higher. A bottle of whiskey might cost 50 cents, and a small amount could treat multiple wounds over weeks. This remedy seems from another world, but it works. Fresh spider webs were collected and pressed directly onto bleeding wounds. The structural proteins in spider silk promote rapid clotting. Within seconds, a wound that was bleeding could be stopped with nothing but a spider web. The web would dissolve as the wound healed, leaving no foreign material behind. This practice was so widespread that it appears in medical journals from the 1870s and the 1880s. Modern research has confirmed that spider silk has clotting properties, and medieval surgeons used it for that exact reason. Cinnamon, brought to Texas through trade routes, was an expensive spice, but worth every penny. Cinnamon powder applied to wounds prevented infection more effectively than almost any other treatment. The spice contains cinnamaldehyde, which has powerful antimicrobial properties. A frontier physician with access to cinnamon would use it liberally on serious wounds. The high cost, sometimes several dollars a pound, meant it was reserved for critical cases, but when used, the difference was dramatic. Wounds treated with cinnamon healed without infection at rates that seemed miraculous to those unfamiliar with the treatment. Number 12. Onion poultice for boils. Raw onions, sliced and applied directly to a boil, would draw out infection and bring it to a head so it could drain safely. The sulfur compounds in onions have antimicrobial properties. An onion poultice applied at night would soften a boil enough that it could drain in the morning. Onions cost almost nothing, grew in many gardens, and worked reliably. A frontier physician without fancy instruments could treat serious boils with nothing but onions and clean cloth. Number 11. Ginger for nausea and inflammation. Ginger root, available at trading posts, was steeped into tea to reduce nausea from illness or from treatments. The root also helped reduce internal inflammation. A cowboy with stomach sickness or inflammation from an injury would drink ginger tea throughout the day. Ginger contains gingerols, compounds that reduce inflammation and improve digestion. A small amount of ginger root would last for weeks of constant use. Number 10. Charcoal for poison. Activated charcoal, made by burning wood in a low-oxygen environment, was one of the few treatments for ingested poison. A man who had eaten something toxic would be given charcoal mixed with water or broth. The charcoal would bind to the toxins and carry them out of the body. This treatment worked for some poisons, but not others, and it was often the only option available. A good frontier physician kept charcoal on hand for accidental poisonings. The charcoal cost nothing but the time to make it. Number 9. Mint tea for stomach cramps. Mint grows wild across Texas, and frontier physicians understood its power to relax the stomach. A tea brewed from fresh mint leaves would ease cramping, reduce bloating, and calm nausea. Mint contains menthol, which relaxes smooth muscle. A cup of mint tea could stop severe stomach cramps in minutes. The herb cost nothing and grew abundantly. Number 8. Lead poultice for fever. This remedy seems poisonous by modern standards, but lead was used deliberately in a dilute form to treat fever. A small amount of lead oxide mixed into a poultice and applied to the forehead or wrists would draw heat from the body. The lead acted as a heat sink, absorbing and dissipating fever. This was dangerous if lead was ingested or applied chronically. For acute fever, a lead poultice applied briefly could be effective. Modern physics explains why. Lead has high thermal conductivity and draws heat efficiently. Number 7. Turpentine for respiratory illness. Turpentine, produced from pine sap, was diluted in alcohol and rubbed on the chest to treat pneumonia and severe coughs. The fumes opened the airways, and they had antimicrobial properties. A small amount of turpentine was potent and dangerous in high doses, but applied correctly, it could reverse respiratory decline. Turpentine cost about 30 cents a bottle, and it lasted for months. Number 6, aloe for burns and wounds. Aloe vera was brought to Texas from the south and was treasured for its gel. Applied fresh to burns or wounds, the gel reduced pain, prevented infection, and promoted healing. Aloe contains polysaccharides that stimulate the immune response and growth factors that accelerate healing. A single aloe plant could provide gel for months of treatment. Number 5, sulfur for parasites and skin infections. Sulfur powder, mined in parts of Texas, was applied to the skin to treat lice, mites, and fungal infections. The sulfur created an environment hostile to parasites without harming human skin. A frontier physician treating a cowhand with lice would dust the entire body with sulfur and repeat daily for a week. The lice would be gone. Sulfur cost a few cents a pound. Number 4, poulticed potato for swelling. Raw potatoes sliced and applied to swollen joints or injuries reduced inflammation. The starch in the potato has anti-inflammatory properties. A frontier cowboy with a swollen knee or ankle would bind raw potato slices to the injury and leave them overnight. By morning, the swelling would be noticeably reduced. Potatoes cost almost nothing, and they were kept in every camp. Number 3, honey and garlic for infection. Raw garlic mixed with honey created a powerful antimicrobial paste. Applied to infected wounds or taken internally for illness, the mixture fought infection on multiple fronts. Garlic contains allicin, one of the most powerful natural antimicrobial compounds known. Combined with honey's natural properties, the paste was remarkably effective. Garlic grew easily in frontier gardens and cost nothing beyond the labor to plant. Number 2, castor oil for wounds and burns. Castor oil extracted from the castor bean was used to dress wounds and burns. The oil protected the wound, reduced pain, and prevented infection. Castor oil cost about 20 cents a bottle and lasted for months. A frontier physician could treat dozens of serious wounds with a single bottle. When fever climbed so high that a man's life hung by a thread, the frontier physician had one last weapon. The patient would be wrapped in alcohol-soaked cloth. The alcohol would evaporate rapidly, drawing heat from the body and dropping fever by several degrees in minutes. This was a desperate measure, used only when death seemed certain. But it worked. The rapid evaporation of alcohol is endothermic. It draws heat from the body. A high fever caused by infection could spike so high that it caused seizure or brain damage. The alcohol wrap could bring fever down fast enough to prevent organ damage and give the immune system time to work. Across all 30 remedies, from the simple whiskey anesthetic to the desperate alcohol fever wrap, these frontier treatments reveal a people who understood their environment and extracted medicine from it with precision. Some seem barbaric by modern standards. Others remain effective and are being rediscovered by medical science. The frontier cowboy, 3 days from the nearest doctor, developed a medical system that worked. He did not have the chemistry to explain it, and modern medicine dismissed most of it as folklore. But the cowboys knew what worked because failure meant death. Try one of these this week. Make a willow bark tea, collect some spider webs, apply a honey poultice. Then ask yourself if our grandmothers and the frontier physicians who came before us were guessing, or if they simply knew something we forgot because we learned to trust pills instead of plants. The frontier taught hard lessons. We stopped listening.